Have you guys ever wondered what does a better Nova sound like? Me neither, but if you did, well, here is the Chopin. I'm calling it a Chopin because it's Halloween, chop chop. Starting with the low end, the Chopin sub bass is pronounced, rumbly, but not quite on that subwoofer like level some of you guys are looking for. It fills in the scoop of the variations, but doesn't overdo it or turn it into a warmer sound signature. It's not vanilla like the Nova, the Hexa, and the Sonus anymore. The Chopin has more authority, more slam, and weight behind each bass note, and similar to the Nova, the Chopin's low end is somewhere in between a scoop and a filled in mid bass. However, it actually works this time because there's just more bass in general and the low end doesn't sound anemic. Even though the texture and physicality isn't unique or game changing like the EA1000s for example, the low end does still do its job and has enough mid bass to satisfy non-bass heads as well as not affecting the mid-range timbre. You can think of the Chopin as a more filled in variations, not mid-bass focused with the low end slightly in the background. For example, I can hear the bass guitars and kick drums clearly with rock tracks, but it just doesn't have the same physicality in the slam as the EA1000, or in other words, it's got great separation but not as musical. Mid-range wise, you can expect all the benefits of a Harman target, so very clear, very uncolored, well separated, and correct in its tonal timbre. Like the Nova, the Chopin is a clean listen with no bias towards male or female vocals. However, it does sound fuller than the Nova because of the extra added mid-bass. Even though it's your typical Harman mid-range with a little masking in the 1.5K region, it does have a slight twist in the upper mids and the treble. The Chopin to me is a more engaging and lively version of the Nova with similar technical performance and coherency. The upper mids on the Chopin is similar to the IEF target and the treble is nicely extended like the Nova, but there are some little peaks in the 5K and 10K regions which adds a little more excitement and liveliness to the sound, which I find more engaging combined with the low end. The 5K peak is similar to the Blessing 3 but more palatable because there's actual bass to balance it out this time. Likewise, the stage is more open and airy versus the Nova because of the extra 10K boost. It reminds me of the EA1000 but not as energetic and just much smoother overall. The EA1000 has more mid-bass and more treble energy, but the timbre and the vocal and the low-end bass texture and physicality still goes to the Fermat. I don't think there's anything that touches it in that area unless you move up to something like the Maestro Mini for the bass and the RS5 or Twilight for the tonal timbre. Resolution wise, the Fermats are also slightly more resolving because of the extra note sharpness, but separation and everything else is fairly similar, so it really depends on your library. If you have a lot of energetic tracks or a mix of genres, then you're better off with the Chopin as it's a more smoother all-rounder. It's basically just Harman if it wasn't boring and it had a few drinks. For my library though, which is more indie, slow rock R&B, ballads, and acoustics, I would go for the EA1000 with the filters because of the low end, the vocals, and the timbre are just a standout at its price, as well as the extra energy actually helps with those genres, giving more musicality combined with the Fermat's low end natural timbre. Versus the Quintet, you are going to get a little bit more micro details on the Quintet, maybe because of the driver. It does sound a little bit sharper on the Quintet, but the timbre does take a hit as it does have a metallic nature to it, so not as natural as the Chopin, whereas the Chopin is going to be smoother overall and with a little bit more sub bass. That aside, everything else is pretty similar from the gain to the mid-range to the separation and resolution. As for the Nova, it's just a better version of the Nova, and compared to the EM6L and Performer 5, it's overall just a small upgrade in terms of the resolution, the clarity, and the treble extension without sacrificing the low end, unlike the Nova. So although the Performer 5 and EM6L may have had a place versus the Nova because of their more engaging and filled in mid-bass, versus the Chopin, they now no longer have that advantage because the low end on the Chopin is satisfying enough, and combined with its better resolution and treble extension, it makes the Chopin the better overall pick. Versus the Heyday, the Chopin is smoother and more weighted in its notes, whereas the Heyday has more treble detail and that sizzle to the end transients of the notes, which some treble heads may like. But the Heyday also has light planar timbre, even though the mid-bass grabs a lot more than the Chopin. The better analogy would be that the Chopin is a mini variations with less gain, note subwoofer bass, and not as detailed and resolving. But honestly, I would take it since it's more than half the price for around 85% of its performance. Likewise, I guess you can also say the CHOPIN is a mini EJ07M and a mini Zen's top. The only difference being that the sub bass texture is a lot better on the EJ07M, as well as more holographic, and the vocals are a little less shouty on the EJs. And as for the top, it's more detailed in the treble and overall a little bit sharper in the resolution. But for a fraction of the price, I think it's a fairly competitive set. But most interestingly, the comparison would actually be to the Hype 2 as it's closer in price. Although the Hype 2 isn't as resolving as the variations, I actually prefer it more because it fixes the vocal masking in the 1.5 and 2K regions, as well as filling in the scoop while retaining that subwoofer-like texture. With that said, the CHOPIN overall still sounds cleaner because the bass is less in the way, less pronounced, which allows it to highlight the mid-range and vocals better than the Hype 2, and it's also $100 cheaper and comes with the Venus tips. However, the Hype 2 does have better bass texture and is more engaging if you have a lot of hip-hop, K-pop, J-pop, or EDM, and the decreased vocal gain also helps the Hype 2 to scale better in those genres. So again, it's more library dependent. Of course, if you want to support Timmy, then the obvious choice would be the GIS Audio CHOPIN. So congrats on the collab, my man. This was a very well-tuned set. But there's actually another IEM, a cheaper one that I enjoy more. Now, I'm not saying it's technically better, it's not, but I do find it more engaging and musical. Video on that soon. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one.